All right. Thank you for the introduction. So hey, my name is Ignace. I'm a Belgian developer, and today I'm going to present to you a talk about automated visual testing in Ember. So first, before we jump into it, a bit about myself. So as I said, I'm Ignace Maes. I'm senior full stack engineer at OTA Insight, and we're actually a tech company in the hospitality industry, and we make software for hotels to better optimize their revenue and distribution decisions, and basically have an all-in-one tool for hotels. We have over 75,000 hotels worldwide that use our application. So chances are the hotel you're actually staying in during Emberfest uses our software. So myself, I've been working in Ember for 4 years. But besides that, I also do a lot of side projects, some open source stuff. So if you're interested in that, yeah, you can find me online via those links. So a bit about OTA Insight as well, because I think it's an interesting history. We actually have a very long history with Ember. So our first app started in 2014. That was back then an Ember version 1 app. It's already quite a long time ago. Back then we were a startup, things were moving fast. Yeah, there was a lot of things that broke, but in the end, in 2016, we decided to do a full rewrite. Because at this time, at a startup, you can still move fast. You can basically take the opportunity to use this and refactor your code base. So we started all over again, do a big rewrite, which at that time wasn't really that big compared to our app now. And as you can see, from that point onwards, we basically started building on top of that same application. So our application that we're building on right now is actually 6 years old already. And that's what we really appreciate in Ember. We really have that upgrade path from an app that started in Ember 2, which is now going all the way to Ember 4. And we even work on modern stuff like Embroider and things like that. So if you're more curious and some extra details, we have a blog post about it. It's at the bottom of the slides. Definitely check it out. What we also noticed when scaling our application is that once your app becomes larger, there's more legacy code. It becomes harder to write new features. For example, when new people join your team, it's very difficult to work in a big application. So as a result of that, we also saw like the number of bugs being reported to our team was really steadily growing. And this year we took some time to review all the customer bugs reported. Really start to think like, what is the reason this bug actually went to production? Why couldn't we prevent this bug? And we actually saw, or we noticed in our setup, that there was one sort of bug that really slipped through the cracks and that we missed out on. So we asked ourselves, how do we catch layout errors? Because layout errors were something we didn't catch in our functional tests. This was manually tested by engineers, by product managers. But once your app gets that big, as you can imagine, for a new joiner, for example, at times you just don't know, does it actually work? Is this actually as intended? And you just deploy it to production, and then it's too late, of course. So how can we prevent these visual errors? Very simple, visual testing. And I'm actually sure that everybody in this room already does this. So visual testing, I hope when you're developing, you have your Ember development server running. And when you write something, you actually look it up in your browser before you deploy it to production. If not, you have some bigger problems that won't be able to fix in this talk. But that's the minimum you can do. But here as well, as your app becomes bigger, it's really difficult to test everything manually. There might be a lot of combinations that you have to test, as well as for new people, it's just really overwhelming. So there must be a better way to do it right. Let's automate it. This brings us to automated visual testing, which is the topic of my talk today. So automated testing, it's actually something, that's a core part of the Ember framework. So as we can read in the documentation, Ember, helps you with that. It gives you tools to write unit tests, to write application tests, and more. So we get this for free when we make an Ember application. But what would visual testing look like? How does this fit in with the Ember testing setup? To explain you that, I made a dummy application, which is called the holidays calendar. And basically, this shows you in one glance myself at the top and me and my colleagues underneath, which names you might recognize. In a simple glance, who is on holiday when. So as you can see at the top, I actually just came back from a three-week holiday. And you see some other people took some days off as well. And at the top, yeah, the current day is highlighted too, so we can quickly see where we're at. So nice, but let's say I just came back out of my 3-week holiday. I made some changes to this application. And as you can see in the next slide, the title of this calendar is now messed up. I accidentally deleted some CSS lines and didn't catch this until it was deployed. So yeah, you can see that the margin is gone. It's not centered anymore, so we don't want this on production. But unfortunately, I did this. So how can we prevent this? Yeah, we could have a functional test that checks if there is a title, but that wouldn't catch these kind of bugs. That would just say that our test has passed because there is a title, but this is not how we want the app to look. So what if we could compare this to the previous screenshots and basically do a differencing between those two versions? And that's what I showcase here. So if we really do a pixel differencing between the baseline, which was the previous version we're comparing to, and then the change that I've made, we can see here highlighted in red, okay, there's actually been a difference made, which is great. If we could have this notify us upfront before deploying, we could check, okay, this is not right, this is not what we want. Great, but maybe one day a developer, a product manager comes in, we want to highlight the current user because it wasn't really clear who it was. For some reason, product managers come up with these feature requests. If we do the same thing all over again, make the difference, here we have a change as well. But in this case, it's an intended change. This is actually what we want. So we see there's two kinds of changes. There's a change that is actually a visual error. There's also a change that we expect. So yeah, compared to regular tests, it's a bit different. We need some kind of way to say, hey, this visual change is actually what I want. So if we if we make this in some bullet points, what we actually want in our setup is basically 4 things. So we need a setup that can take screenshots of our application. We also need a way, like the pixel differencing, to really find out what is different between the two versions. We also need a way to notify us, like we want to know it upfront before we release. So a way to integrate that in our workflow. And finally, like I said, we need a way to say like, okay, this change I expected, but the other one is actually a visual bug. Of course, this isn't a new problem. I'm not inventing this. There actually exist tools out there in out in the wild to help you with this. Some tools are open source, some tools are closed source, some are free, some are paid. The goal of this talk is not to give you or say which tool you should use or compare them all. I think that's up to you if you decide to use visual testing in your application. Depends on the needs of your application. But for this talk, I'm going to use Percy. For the simple reason, it just ticks all those boxes that we want. So for tests, they have an Ember integration. And they actually use a smart trick. Instead of taking a screenshot in your tests, they actually copy the DOM tree of your test states and they send that over to their servers so they can render the screenshots on their servers, which is also nice because that means you can also do really testing on different screen sizes. So if you have a responsive application, you can have just one test for both mobile and desktop. For the image differencing, this is also handled on their server, so nothing for you to worry about to handle on your own. They have a workflow integration with a GitHub and a GitLab plugin, as well as a public API if you want to do some more customization. And finally, they offer a web UI where you can really see those screenshots and compare them and see, hey, this is a change that I expected, or hey, this is actually a bug and we should fix it. All right. You might be wondering, like, how do I add this to my projects? What does it look like in code? So let's quickly take that calendar application that I showed you earlier and write a visual test for that. So we're going to use the Ember CLI, just generate an acceptance test here. I picked the name application because everything is just served in the root URL. So once we trigger, we get a regular acceptance test like you probably are familiar with. So we have just one module for the acceptance test containing one test here that visits the calendar application. So we first visit the calendar application and then we do a single assertion just to double check that we're actually on the right page. All right, how do we integrate this with visual testing? So as I said, Percy offers an Ember add-on. So if we use that, you can see once we add the import and then at the bottom call Percy snapshots, we can actually take that snapshot, like the copy of that DOM tree, and send it over to Percy server so they can generate screenshots out of this. So let's run it. What does this do? If we execute it, we can just run it like a regular Ember test. So we have Ember tests and then we filter on it just so we get that visual test. But the difference being here we prefix it with Ember exec because that's what their CLI needs to be able to send over that snapshot to their server. Great. At the end, you can see there's actually a URL. So this one leads you to the web UI where you can see those screenshots. So if you open that, we see, nice, it works. We see a screenshot of the calendar application. That's exactly what we wanted. Yeah, we could run this again, and then we could see the pixel differencing in here as well. So yeah, I could end my talk here, but that's not what I'm going to do because does it really work? Like, have we fixed everything? Have we covered everything? What, for example, if our API goes down, we fetch all my colleagues, all my holidays from a server, that would be an issue. Yeah, we would have just an error or we have an empty application. What if the API is slow? Like you don't want it to really slow down your visual testing setup in front end. What if it returns new data? Somebody added a new holiday. That would cause a visual difference, but not necessarily a bug. And also, what if we run the same test again the day after? Really, what it comes down to is we want to avoid false positive changes. So here, I run the same test again today, 2 days later after the first screenshot. And as you can see, there's a new holiday added in here, as well as like the day has been updated at the top. So if we switch over to the visual differencing, here we can see we have some differences in there, but those are just because the data has changed and because the day when we execute it changes. So we could approve this, but it's pretty annoying, right? If we always have to approve all these changes that are not exactly bugs, but still show up as differences, yeah, we could easily overlook actual visual errors. So how do you make our visual tests reliable? This is really what makes the difference between having a short demo of visual testing and actually implementing it in a real life application. We really want that, the deterministic behavior. We want to be able to run our same visual test again the day after and still have the same results. Yeah, I think a lot of the issues that I talked about was about data and about APIs being slow or going down. So a solution for that is API mocking. This is not new to visual testing. If you do regular testing, you might already also do API mocking. And here I listed a couple of tools and libraries that you can use for this. So yeah, Mirage is probably the most known one in the Ember community. It allows you to have a data layer and on top of that, create some models and build some endpoints for that, serve that data to your testing file have it run like that. That works fine, but it's very intensive to set up, to maintain. So whenever your API changes, you have to update that as well. Yeah, create all that mock data yourself. So it's a lot of work. We also have mock service workers, which kind of takes a similar approach, but here you use service workers, which has the main advantage that you can use developer tools in your browser to actually debug it. But still, you have to create all your endpoints yourself. So a lot of manual work. The one listed below, PolyJS, takes kind of a different approach that allows you to record your HTTP interactions and actually replay them. So just as if you would have a regular call to your backends, it could just repeat that same call as if it were the real one. So seems pretty nice. Can we use that for our visual testing? I installed it here in the same test, added the imports, added the setup function, and that's basically it. So here I'm starting it in the record mode, which basically, as I said, will take all the network requests that are being done. It will be stored locally. What does it look like? If you run the test again, we will actually see that there's a new file popping up in your file structure. This is recording in the HR format or the HTTP archive format, which basically is a dump of all your network requests. So here it has some metadata with the entries below, if we zoom onto that, actually contains the API requests with also the full content, headers, cookies, you name it. Pretty sweet. If we then switch back to the test, now that we have the stored recording, we can change it to the replay mode. And now instead of doing an actual request to your backend server, it will now take that recording stored locally and replay it. If we run the same test again now, it works because we have that all the data stored locally to render this application. It doesn't matter if anybody adds a new holiday, if the API goes down. It's not our problem in front end, it's backend's problem. It just works, we're happy. All right, but I think we can still make it a bit more usable. We really want to have tests helping you and not be annoying. So what if there's a way we could really make it so you can update recordings without having to dive into your actual codes test? Because you can imagine if you have hundreds of test files, that would be really annoying to update the recordings and always make them up to date. So we have a test runner in Ember, the QUnit test runner by default. If you visit your localhost/test, you will have something like this. So is there a way we can integrate our recordings into this? Turns out there is. You can customize QUnit to add custom configuration options, which appear in the toolbar at the top. So we can add, as the documentation says, your own checkboxes and select dropdowns. Pretty sweet, that's exactly what we need. So if we switch back to the code, in the test helper file, which is used by Ember to boot up your test suite, we can add such a configuration option just for the polyrecord. Here I passed the ID polyrecord as well as with some extra information about it, just to render it in the UI. All right. Now that we added or registered this configuration option, we still need to use it. We have to couple it to our test. So basically here, by default, we run setup and replay mode. But if the option is turned on, we switch to record mode. All right, if we then go back to our test runner, we see our option has appeared in QUnit, and we can just by one tap of a button update our recordings of our tests. That's pretty nice. This really makes it very, very quick to update your data. Whenever backend makes a change, you can just record your recordings again. I think we can still clean it up a bit more. By default, Ember ships you some helper functions that really allow you to set up a test and extend it what you want to see in that test. So by default, it generates this for application unit and run, and unit test. But what if we just add a new one for visual tests? So basically what we used before is just the setup of an application test, and then our configuration options for poly, and then here we use the hooks before each function just to switch that from replay to record mode. So now we have one shared function that we can use to set up our visual test. Great, I don't like repeating codes. So this, if we change it back in the test, it's a bit more cleaner, and we have a nice way to reuse that code. So at the top here, it's now setup visual test instead of setup application test. Yeah, that's one problem solved, but there's still another problem. We had that day highlighted that changed, and that was because just we ran the same test again the day after. How do we change that? And for that, we have date mocking. If you do a quick Google search, there's some libraries for that allow you to do it. One that I found is mockdate. It has a very simple API. You just install it and you can set a date to whatever you want. So this mocks the actual native date class. So if you're using any other library like Moment.js or any other, they will basically use this behind the scenes. So also these kind of libraries just work with it. Great. How does it look like when we integrate date mocking into our visual test? So before we do the visits, we can just add a line to set the date to today, and then afterwards clean it up by resetting the date again so we don't impact any other tests that might come after this. We can clean it up a bit more. So we already had that setup visual test function. If we also move that reset of the date to an after each function here, we don't have to repeat it again anymore. And it's just one other thing cleaned up from the actual test. Okay, great. If we then run the test again, the visual test, we will now always have the same data and the same dates. So we basically got rid of our problems and of the false positives. That's really nice. This is finally what our test looks like. So we have that setup visual test function, and the rest of the visual test itself is actually pretty straightforward and just is a nice pattern, so you can easily add 100 more of these. All right. So now that we know, that we have a structure to actually make visual tests, how does it fit in our way of developing? We still want to avoid those visual errors before we deploy to production. How does it integrate somehow with how we write codes? I've made a simple. Basically, if we start on the top left, when you write codes, when you push codes, we would run our visual tests in this case. There we check, is there any difference or not? If there's no visual change, it's simple. Everything is fine. We don't have to do anything. But if there is a visual change, we actually have to review those. So like we said earlier, a visual change can be something we intended, like a new feature development. We actually expect our UI to look different, but it can also be a visual error. So here we can either reject them if it's a visual error or accept them if it's something we expect. If everything is accepted, all right, great. We have a nice looking UI without bugs. But if there is some unexpected changes in there, we will have to fix those and start the cycle all over again. All right. Percy offers some way to integrate this in your workflow by the GitHub integration, for example, here. That basically, when you open a pull request, that can run your visual tests, and that can also notify you, is there any visual change that has to be reviewed? Or is everything fine and is my PR good to go? Can I merge it? So this really saves you time and makes it like you have a structured way of visually testing your application. All right, let's wrap things up. I hope this talk gave you a good introduction of what visual testing is and what it is not. So visual testing allows you to catch layout errors that you don't otherwise cover in functional tests. I also hope it gave you an idea of why you might need visual tests. So really, to save you time and just deploy with that confidence, to not have those visual errors reported by customers, you really want to catch them before you deploy to production. And finally, I hope you had some insights as well on how to reliably implement visual testing and the kinds of issues you have to deal with when setting up a system like this. And that's it. Thank you.